What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the after credit scene. We are talking episode 4 of Loki. We're going to go through all of the different things that happened. This is a spoiler heavy review and breakdown. So if you haven't watched it, mark this, go watch it, come back. We're going to talk specifically about time travel rules, multiversal rules, and what we can expect and what this episode means for the future of Loki, but also for the future of the MCU. Before we get into all that, please like and subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so when we drop new content, you'll be the first one to know about it, and then share this sucker all across the multiverse. Now, my first comment about this episode, spoiler free, this is what Marvel TV should be. There are lots of great things, amazing things about the Netflix shows, lots of amazing things about Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and the things that happened on ABC, but for me as a fan, these episodes that have or could potentially have ramifications in the greater movies where not that they're required viewing that you won't understand something in the movies. I think the movies have the opportunity to go back and explain these things again to kind of reinforce it, but where the TV shows actually matter, where you can get some depth to what happened, why it happened, what it looked like, the behind the scenes stuff, so to speak. So when you see things in the movies, you go, how did that happen? What are they talking about? How did that occur? You can get the depth of it. You can get all the little nitty gritty things that they don't have time to explain in the movies. But that they matter, that it's not just stories and characters that are throwaway, that if you never saw them, you never heard about them, it wouldn't matter. As if She-Hulk or Ms. Marvel stay on TV, regardless of how you feel about the episodes or the series. If they just stayed on TV, it would kind of keep that lackluster feel, but connecting them to the movies, giving them some credence and it gives them some weight. I think it adds to what happens in both arenas and can really highlight and color and really bring some more vibrancy to the universe. This episode of Loki, provided the final 2 episodes really pay off, this will be, without a doubt, for me, the best series in the MCU because there's 2 seasons of it. It'll push it ahead of Moon Knight for me. I think Moon Knight is well acted, well written, regardless of how you feel about the pacing or the story or whatever. I thought it was excellent, but WandaVision's way up there for its uniqueness, but this will no doubt, unless they just drop the ball completely, similar to what they did with Secret Invasion, this has the potential to be the best thing on TV that Marvel has ever done. And I think that bodes well for the rest of the MCU and the movies coming forward. Let's talk about all the time travel stuff. Let's talk about all the big implications of this episode. Theoretically, so it looks like lots of people died in this episode. You have General Dox and all of the TVA hunters that were on her side that pruned branches earlier in the series. They are killed by Renslayer and Miss Minutes. Miss Minutes gets rebooted. She will probably pop up someplace else, but we're not exactly sure. And if she does, is she going to be angry? Is something going to be different? Renslayer has been pruned. Pruned to where? With what happens at the end of the episode, that could mean anything. She clearly has a TemPad or some way to get back from He Who Remains lair back to the TVA. So how does she get someplace? Where does she go? Victor Timely, we see the spaghettification of Victor Timely. The show writers practically spoon-fed that one to you starting in episode 1 and seeing that it was going to be him. If you go back and look at my prediction videos, I have told you this gets worse before it gets better. And it has to end poorly because the multiverse cannot be fixed. It has to break open. It has to lead towards the multiversal war because that's what's coming in Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. But all of those characters taken out, gone. Another hunter, the one that was with Victor Timely, gets pruned as well. There are several characters in this episode that are just gone. Obviously, Renslayer and Miss Minutes will more than likely come back. I suppose they could do the same thing with Victor Timely. Maybe he gets scattered across the multiverse. Who knows? The Fallout episode 5 is going to be a big episode for what happens and giving more multiversal rules moving forward. That's a big thing for me. I think this show has done a great job of explaining and giving you visuals and language to explain these multiversal concepts that they're going to be introducing further on out in the MCU. With regard to time travel, it was throwing me for a loop early on, and I was making sure to get a few episodes in before I talked about it, but now we're there and we're going to talk about it. If you follow the rules of Endgame, the Russos made quite the spectacle of making sure that we as fans all knew time travel does not work the way that all the other movies have showed us that they work. That there's one timeline where if you go back and forth, the things that you do here affect things in the future. That it doesn't work that way in the real world. That it does in fact create alternate timelines, but that somehow you can go back and stop that alternate timeline from being created is a little more accurate, but that still presumes that there's a multiverse and that those things will always continue to happen, that if you change those things, that it does not remove that possibility from the multiverse. It simply is part of your past and future, that your past and future cannot be changed. Your life will not change by something that happens in the past. You'll always be you, you'll always have your memories. Everyone around you will always be continuing to live the life that they're living regardless of what happens back here. It's not like going back here, you'll be able to meet somebody and they'll have memories of you in the future because they met you someplace. They've already lived that, it's already happened, it's a different person. Instead, it creates different timelines where there is a person that in the future would know that they met someone, similar to Tony Stark meeting his dad. When Tony goes back to his timeline, to his future, his dad would not remember him. It would be an alternate timeline. That's the way the multiverse works, and it works in both directions. There are things in the future where people can go back and see things, but your future, your timeline, your story continues on. There are multiple possibilities, and every time there's a choice, every time something changes, it's a new branch, and it just continues forever and ever and ever, like roots and like the branches of a tree on both sides. The mix-up occurs, and I want to make sure we set this straight. The mix-up occurs when you see those particular things that Endgame says can't happen, happening in the TVA. Things like Loki getting pulled through time and him going to the past and the future. This happened in episode 4, where we see Loki, the older version of Loki, who is outside of time, holding on to the little compass that he got in episode 1, and you find out that the future version of him is the one that prunes him, so he prunes himself in episode 4. Those kind of things happening. Ouroboros saying that he learned what he learned from a 19th century inventor, and Victor Timely saying, well, I learned everything I learned from Ouroboros, and somehow they have learned from each other. One begs the question, where did it start? Who learned what from who first? Did one of them learn it independent of the other one first and then introduce it to the other one? The loop has to start. We did see that. We did see that when Renslayer gives Ouroboros' book to Victor Timely. We saw the beginning of Victor's portion of that loop, but we haven't seen the beginning of Ouroboros' portion of that loop, okay? The sneaky little part there is Ouroboros makes the comment that it's a loop, that it's like a snake eating its own tail. Yes, it's a loop, but understand, there is a head, there is a tail, which means it started somewhere. The head had to start eating the tail of the snake somewhere. So there is a beginning to that. However, as multiversal rules go, once the loop occurs, the loop is self-sustaining. So there is a starting point, and there are reasons for that. That is different than some things that happened in Ms. Marvel, where it looks like time was affecting itself, past, present, and future. That has more to do, I think, with the bangle that Kamala was wearing than it does with any kind of time travel rules. And we can talk about that later. You go back and look at some of my TikToks. We got some explanations of those things. However, that conversation with Victor and Ouroboros, coupled with Loki in episode 1 going into the past and explaining things to a past version of OB, where the future version says, oh, I do know that. I do have some kind of temporal tool that I've been working on that 5 seconds ago he said he wasn't working on. How does that work, and why does it work, and why does it not break the end game rules set forth by the Russos? Here's why, and they feed it to you at least 3 separate times. One, in episode 1, they explain several times, and OB explains it too. That's not supposed to happen. It doesn't work that way. 2, all throughout season 1 and into season 2, they have talked about and given you hints. Time moves differently, works differently in the TVA than it does anyplace else. You still have to consider the TVA outside of time, but still on a timeline of some sort. I would consider it almost a dotted line on a road. If the straight line is the timeline, the dotted line would be the TVA, where they can move in and out and fill in gaps, and their dots and their lines move around. While they're in the TVA, while they're there, they can experience a straight flowing movement of time. I did something earlier that is in the what we would call past, but now I am in the future because the actions I just performed I'm no longer continuing to do them. So there is a past, present, and future. Another way to kind of word that and explain it would say where Renslayer says that the clocks don't tick in the TVA. It almost assumes that time has stopped. Another way I would word that is that the potential for everything to be happening in the present is always possible in the TVA, which means Loki can be in the past, in past experiences, in things that happened before, but he can also be in situations that happen in the future. But he can also be in a situation that happens in the middle, or he can be in none of those places. Same with Renslayer. Same with the things we saw at the beginning of episode 4, where you learn Renslayer's secret. You learn that she was with He Who Remains when he created the loom, when he created the TVA, when they got everything created so that they isolated our timeline to create the sacred timeline. When he then sends Renslayer back to the TVA and wipes her memory, that is a new beginning for them. But since they are variants, since they are outside of time, especially with He Who Remains, it's all happening at the same time. It would explain the way that He Who Remains makes some of the comments that he makes and knows what's going on. He can manipulate them as though they're all sitting on a table in front of them like a stack of dominoes or playing cards, and he reshuffles them. So from our vantage point, the multiversal war has not started. From He Who Remains' standpoint, it has already started, it has already happened, and what he is doing now is preventing this. But the things that he is doing, and the things that Sylvie and others do, will also have the potential to unleash it, either for the first time, or for a second time, or all over again, or for the first. It doesn't matter. Again, the loop has to start somewhere, and from our vantage point, we're seeing the beginning of the loop. But from their vantage point, and from Kang's vantage point, it's already happened, it's been happening, and in other timelines, it could still be happening. If the TVA didn't do what they're doing and the things that we're seeing we're following one thread, and we're getting these other cross threads, and it's going to get a little crazy. Episode 5 is going to be one of those crazy parts. So I told you, TVA gives you 3 reasons why things happen differently, why things work outside of time, and why the rules for Endgame don't get subverted by what's happening in Loki. The first one was that time moves differently outside the TVA. The second one was that clocks don't tick. And the third one, which is one of my favorite, as they are walking into the loom to fix things, after Loki prunes himself and Sylvie watches one version of Loki fade away to another version holding a prune stick, he looks at Sylvie and said, I promise you this will all make sense. I took that line to be less of a comment from Loki to Sylvie and more of a comment from Michael Waldron and the writing crew to all of us Marvel fans to say, stick with us. This is going to make sense. We're not leading you astray. We have a plan. We know what we're doing. And I have been on board since day one, not just with Loki, but with all things Marvel, moving past Endgame and going on into Kang Dynasty and Secret Wars. I'm curious what you guys think. I have loved this series so far. I love the humanity and the character plot lines where they are showing you and reinforcing this idea that we all have the potential inside of us to be good or bad, and we have choices to make. The first season was a lot about some of those ideas, but it was really all about free will. Are you more than what people say you are? Loki had to decide, am I a villain? Am I worthy of love? Am I worthy of these things? This season, you've got Victor Timely, where Miss Minutes confronts him in this episode and says, you'll never be him. And Timely has to decide, am I a good guy? Am I a bad guy? I see all these pictures. I know that some people think I'm becoming this bad thing. I shouldn't be here, but I am more than that. Same with Loki, same with Mobius, same with General Dox and the way that Hunter B-15 tries to reach out to her. The choices that people make are what define them. And they're leaning into that, I think, because that really is at the core of what creates a multiverse. What creates these other timelines is the choices you make. And in one timeline, you are a good person. In one timeline, you may not be. Which I think endears me more to Mobius as opposed to Sylvie with the conversation they have where Sylvie gets angry at Mobius because he hasn't even looked to see what his life could be like someplace else. The ironic thing is that Sylvie is the same way. She came from Asgard. She was taken as a child. She spent her whole life trying to be something else, trying to free herself so she can be whatever she wants to be. And then she doesn't go back to an Asgardian timeline. She goes to the 1970s and works as a cashier at McDonald's because she wants to try everything. She doesn't know who she is, which is exactly what Mobius has already accepted and agrees with. Is that I like who I am here. Being content with who you are, where you are, regardless of what other people say you could be or should be, and living out that life. Mobius has his own goals and his own desires and hopes and dreams, and that's great. And I think those things are interesting plot lines and stories to talk about. There is potential in all of us to be whoever we're supposed to be. Now, clearly, not everybody is dead. We're at episode 4. We got 2 more episodes to go. The explosion is not going to kill everybody. It's not going to destroy everything. But what happens, where they go, and what happens from here on out. I think episode 4 and 5 are going to be pivotal MCU episodes, similar to the explanation we got from He Who Remains in episode 6 of season 1 of Loki, which was episode 6 of season 1 was the birth of the multiverse, or our introduction. Let's put it that way. Our introduction to the multiverse. We opened the door to it. The sacred timeline was opened. The sign went from closed to open. We are now accessible. And it created all these problems to be able to get it under control. The timeline was never supposed to be separated and severed from the rest of the timelines. And everything you're seeing is because that barrier has been broken. And now all these other timelines are colliding with us. We're colliding with them. And what does that mean for our timeline moving forward? And where are these crosses? Could it be incursions? All these different things that you learned about in Multiverse of Madness, these ideas that are coming that we have not seen yet, I think are going to make a lot more sense after episode 4 and episode 5. You got presumably not just the birth of the multiverse, but our entrance into the dawn of the multiverse, so to speak, the birth of it. and then the growth of it, the explosion of the multiverse, where that spread of the multiverse is now our reality, is now everybody's reality. It's going to be interesting to see what they do. Episode 5, I think, is going to have a lot of heavy lifting to do in terms of explaining these things and in terms of what's happening, what's going on. Now, potentially, episode 5 could be the fallout, and we could just get a lot of where is everybody? And everybody's licking their wounds and healing. And then episode 6 is the explanation and the wrap up. I still think we got a lot more doubling back to do, you know, the head and tail of the snake, so to speak. We got Victor Timely's beginning, but we have not gotten Ouroboros' beginning. There's a lot more to him, and they really hit that heavy this episode. Curious what you guys think. I loved this episode. I loved the link back to the first Thor movie where Sylvie and Loki are talking. I thought that was great. I thought it was ironic that people in the TVA were saying things like, we don't have time to do these things, when they are literally dealing with trying to keep time from exploding, so to speak. I think Miss Minutes has her own agenda. I think Ravonna is not gone, and we're going to see her again in this series. It's going to be interesting to see what happens from here on out. And I am curious, as always, to what you guys think. What are your theories? What are your comments? Add them below in our comments. Check out some of our other videos, including our definitive multiverse explanation up here. And as always, guys, when the next one drops, we'll catch you right back here. Later.